The first variation is the remote proxy. That's the one we used as an example. The idea here is that a client can communicate with the proxy, thus treating it as a local resource. The pattern hides the fact that the actual object exists in a different network space. The client does not need to know that a remote service is called. The proxy hides away these network and protocol details. More often than not, these proxies are generated from a service definition. That can be a WSDL or, more common these days, an Open API specification. The second variation is the virtual proxy. This one allows creating expensive objects on demand. You can look at it as a stand-in for an object that is expensive to create. So, performance optimization is a big advantage of this type of proxy. Another variation is the smart proxy. The purpose is to allow adding additional logic around a subject. Typical examples are managing caching or locking access to shared resources. The last variation is the protection proxy. This one is used to control access to an object. It can be useful when objects should have different access rights. Like that, checking for that no longer has to be done by the client code or in the object itself. It's the protection proxy that's responsible for this. Sometimes the separation between these different types of proxies isn't clear. It's not uncommon for code generators to, for example, generate a proxy that both hides away the fact that a remote service is accessed and takes care of permissions and access restrictions. This, of course, is in violation of the single responsibility principle. A better approach would be to chain proxies. In other words, proxy the proxy, sticking with a single responsibility per proxy. We'll cover that with a demo. These variations all have their own responsibilities and consequences. But as far as implementation is concerned, they all follow the same structure. So, what we are going to do in an example is implement two of these. We're going to implement a virtual proxy and we're going to implement a protection proxy. That one is very closely related to the smart proxy because both allow additional housekeeping tasks when an object is accessed. As an example, we will use a document object, which represents a PDF or a text file. Imagine that this is an object that is expensive to create, which is pretty common. You might, for example, want to read out the underlying file from disk as part of the creation process, and that is quite expensive. The virtual proxy pattern can be used to ensure that creation only happens when needed. And then we'll add a business rule stating that the document can only be viewed by people in the viewer role. We will use a protection proxy for this, and we will chain that with the virtual proxy. Let's implement this.